This video will discuss economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, and constant returns to scale. Provide you both illustrations and an example to illustrate each of these three different scenarios a company could face. Economies of scale, what is it? This is the property where a cost function experiences average costs which decline as output expands. So you have long run average cost, and which is graphed on a dollar amount, width on the vertical and output on the horizontal. And as output expands, your long run average costs decline. This is also a property of natural monopolies. Utility companies, for example, commonly exhibit economies of scale, where they have lower average cost as they serve more customers. That's economies of scale. Diseconomies of scale is the opposite scenario. So diseconomies of scale is this property of a cost function where the average cost of productivity increases as your output expands. So the graph of the longer average cost curve has this positive slope. This says, hey, as output expands, our average costs are rising. So for example, back in the 1980s and 1990s, General Motors was the largest auto company in the world. General Motors has since downsized their production, sold off some of their brands that were not profitable, because they found that they were having diseconomies of scale, or their average costs were rising as they produced more and more vehicles. So for General Motors, they wanted to get smaller to lower their average cost. So General Motors was experiencing diseconomies of scale. It was worse being bigger. So now they're no longer the world's largest automotive company, and let's hope General Motors can return to profitability. Finally, we have constant returns to scale. In this case, the average costs don't change as output expands. Constant returns to scale, again, the slope of the long-run average cost function is 0. It doesn't change as output expands. So here, there are no advantages or disadvantages to being larger. Whereas diseconomies of scale was clearly a disadvantage to General Motors to being larger. Economies of scale, there's an advantage to being larger. That's why typically only one utility company serves a certain neighborhood, because it's cheaper for one company to serve everyone in the neighborhood rather than have competing companies serve the neighborhood. So to summarize then, this table does a nice job illustrating the connection between average costs and returns to scale. For example, if you're producing 1 unit of output with a single worker and a single piece of capital, given your input costs are $6 each, that would be a total cost of $12. Given you're making 1 unit of output, that's an average cost of $12. Now, what happens if we double the number of inputs we use? 2 workers, 2 machines. Well, our output more than doubled. We now have 3 units of output. So our output's 3. Our costs doubled because we doubled our inputs. But our average cost declined now. 24 over 3 is 8. Since average cost declined as output expand, this is a property of increasing returns to scale. Now what happens next? Well, let's double our inputs again. So our inputs doubled from 2 to 4 for labor, 2 to 4 for machines or capital. This has caused our cost to double. What's happened to our output? Well, it doubled from 3 to 6. So in this case, the average cost, 48 divided by 6, is still 8. Average cost did not change. This is a property of constant returns to scale. Finally, we have the case where we are going to double our inputs, yes, so our costs double, but now our output's less than doubling. So here, our average costs have now risen. So now we have decreasing returns to scale.